You talked earlier at the press conference about the fact that, you bring someone like Thrawn in and you want him to be a formidable threat. And how do you do that? It looked in the premiere, not to give too many spoilers, but it looks like, he is a tactician. He is looking at the long game. Can you talk about Thrawn's approach?
Yeah, we tried really hard to keep it the same that you see in the book. One of the things that, it was interesting, it's kind of easy because after having read the material so long ago, there were things that stuck with me about the character. And those are the things that Henry Gilroy and I felt were most important to keep, to stay consistent with. And the biggest one for me was the art. The analyzation of culture and art was how he dissected and defeated his opponents. And we kept that very much alive. So even in the trailer, you'll see him looking at a bunch of holograms of different pieces of art. And one of the fun things for me was like having fans probably freeze those and try to figure out what is he looking at and why and what's he getting from it. And he couldn't be a loud villain, I never saw him in the books as someone that shouted. His crew seemed to have a lot of faith and trust in him because he was so brilliant a tactician. So those are all the things we kept, and with that, we needed a really kind of different voice, a different tone, and that was the hardest search of all, to eventually find Lars Mikkelsen to voice him. And imagine that challenge, here you have a great character that people love, Thrawn, but they've never really heard him talk before, not at length. So I have the responsibility of saying this is his voice.
Yes.
And I know going in it won't please everybody, but I'm going to think that we please more than not with what we've done.
There was so much in that trailer, and people were obviously seeing some big and shiny things there. But there's one thing I need to ask you about that I know is near and dear to your heart, which is, let's talk about some battle droids.
Battle droids. And you saw those.
You saw those guys, and what is going on there? And can you talk about how they might come into the story, and the fact that obviously for you, having done the Clone Wars series, getting to sort of bring them into the Rebels era?
There's several funny things about those battle droids. The first is that they're actually way better than the ones I had in Clone Wars. In Clone Wars, they were a Season 1 asset, and because of the nature of them, we never really took the time to fix them, to actually make them look better as that show got better looking. Because a lot of the feeling was, well, not a lot of people outside of Matt Wood care a lot about the battle droids, so no one's going to notice we upgraded them anyway.
Right.
But for Rebels, Killian actually took a much closer look, and we decided not to over-stylize them differently. So we're a lot more true to their head shape, even more like kind of Doug Chiang's original concept battle droids. So I love the way they look. And we are kind of moving through the kind of path we had last season, where we're touching on some Clone Wars things and bringing things to a head. So there is a kind of episode coming up, I believe it's called The Last Battle of the Clone Wars, something like that is its name. And was really an emotional thing for a lot of the crew in Star Wars Rebels, because they all fought the Clone Wars.
Yes.
So here they're watching these battle droids on screen again, walking around, and Rex yelling with his helmet on, and it kind of took us all back several years. But it was an important story for Ezra mainly, as you'll see in the future, to have those guys there. And we had a great opportunity to put them in the same space as classic Star Wars elements. And that was kind of very eye-opening. Because while we know the prequels and the classic trilogy, back to back, it's very limited how much they've ever crossed over.
Right.
So when you see Ahsoka Tano standing in front of Darth Vader, even more than just it being about her confronting him and the story of it, you're literally seeing someone from a prequel era timeline confronting a classic trilogy character in a major way. And that, I think, is just as important for the battle droids. To see them operating in the same space that the Empire is a little bit mind-blowing. So,
you mentioned Vader. Last we saw him, he had taken some licks. Of course, we don't know what happened to Ahsoka. We know Vader survived.
Yeah.
Right now, you've got two big threats this season. But Vader, he might not have any Inquisitors left. I don't know if you have said definitively if there's none left.
I don't know.
But he knows that Kanan and Ezra are out there, and I would think eventually he'd probably want to deal with that. Can you just talk about where Vader might be as far as, not physically maybe, but where those Jedis are out there. I got to deal with that threat.
And on some level, yes. But on another level, I think you'll see that we've orchestrated the story, and something that Simon and I talked about, to make it very believable why Kanan and Ezra have survived as long as they have. We have to have these reasons why that's true.
Right.
And, sometimes, like earlier on, we're like, well, we'll figure it out. No, it's going to be fine. And as each season goes on, it's like, hey, we're getting kind of closer to the end of all things here. Like, how are we figuring this all works? And so we have sat down and discussed it more deeply. Why is that? Okay, where is Vader's gaze? Why is it not so much on these guys? And there are reasons that are going to be happening that he would be actually, more importantly, put elsewhere. And that's going to tie into kind of the story in the background. But the other main reason is, and I said it when we brought him in, is like, without Ahsoka, those guys are doomed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great that Ezra can spin and jump and take out stormtroopers with greatest of ease, but he's not going to beat Darth Vader, you know.
Right.
Neither is Kanan. So Maul really becomes the main dark side foil in this season.
So Maul, you know, you've talked about, you and Whit were both talking about the fact that Maul keeps getting knocked down and gets back up again. But that clip released yesterday, which you can watch on IGN.com right now, the clip shows Maul seemingly sort of holding all the cards. Everything seems to be coming up Maul in that clip.
Yeah.
Could he talk about that and you know, what his course might be this season after all he's gone through, as he's trying to regain this power, and how Ezra might, you know, be a big facet of that?
Well, you know, it's interesting. This is a little bit insider the know, which I haven't talked about. Maul wasn't actually meant to survive the Malachor episode.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was a lot of thought given to taking him out there, because a lot of the Malachor arc originally was more about Vader confronting Maul.
Yeah.
And that was going to be a story about that. It became clear to me as the emotional content of the story was developed and we worked on it more that was just going to be wrong. That, you know, if anything happened to Maul, it needed to have its proper time and its proper space. So, yeah, that's how he kind of got a pass and survived into this season. And then, you know, then you start to think more about the character and more things develop. His relationship with Ezra in last season's finale was, you know, planned but also surprising, because Sam is so good at being that coercive person, and Taylor fed off of it. You know, because Taylor kind of lives in a world where he's not as knowledgeable about Star Wars itself as some of the more veteran fans, like you know, Sam and I and Freddie. So the pull between kind of Freddie's knowledge of Star Wars and Sam's knowledge of Star Wars is very real, and Kanan's knowledge of the light side and Sam's knowledge of the dark side, or Maul's knowledge of the dark side. So we wanted to play that more. So you're going to see this kind of push and pull on Ezra. And Maul is kind of that influencer that's saying maybe power has a means to an end. Maybe this is a way to do things. And what's interesting is it's not really the Empire's side he's fighting on. He's just straight fighting on the side of power and darkness and the dark side. So it's a bit different than something we've seen before, which makes Maul kind of a different villain than we've ever seen before. He's not straight out with the main bad guy group. If the main bad guys saw him, they'd probably go after him too.
Right. So
he's got to be really shady and shadowy with everything he's doing. He's almost better off trying to hang with those rebels because they have morality which he can work to his advantage.
That all being said, you've got to eventually do Vader and Maul meeting up, right?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I mean, you know, I think you get worried. It sounds like a great idea, and then you start to develop it, and you're worried it's a little more fan servicey. So if it makes sense, it would happen, but I'd say it's unlikely.
Let me lastly ask you about Wedge, because you spoke about how this is really connecting us more and more to A New Hope, and you're going to bring in more elements. But with Wedge, you think now, I mean, especially when you look at canon, we don't know a lot of Wedge, right?
No.
There's very little about him.
Shocking, yeah.
Yeah. So was that interesting for you to kind of build from the ground up a guy who I remember seeing the Star Wars trilogy in '85 and people cheering every time Wedge came on screen? One of those early sort of fan base heroes.
Yeah, well, in a lot of ways, the storyteller is kind of a safe zone because I know I could utilize that character and not screw somebody else up. Because, wielding this continuity is a big challenge. And oftentimes, you start to get on the path and you hear, wait a minute, what are you doing with that? And then you look and you go, okay, let's get together and talk about that because we didn't know, because everybody's timelines are very tight. But we always get it to work out in the end. But so Wedge was an opportunity where you say, there hasn't been a lot done, so we go, Wedge, boom. Flag in the ground for animation. We got Wedge right now from here to here. Let's talk about that. Because we know he's going to survive because he's in all the films. But let's tell a story of how does he come into service of the rebellion, and is that a unique story? And I think we were able to do something that fans are going to find interesting, because you notice he doesn't really look like Wedge in the trailer.
No.
So
a little bit of a different
vibe going on there.
Yeah, they're about to drag you away. dark saber. Anything you can say about bringing the dark saber
That
back
is
in?
just the tip of the dark saber that you're seeing there.
Ah.
Probably one of the more important stories that we've done. It's very exciting for me to have that element back and really explore what it means to Sabine, what that Mandalorian culture, as we reconnect with her, and more importantly, her family, which is going to be a big thing. We've always alluded to that there's something that drove Sabine out of the Imperial Academy and eventually away from her family of Mandalore, and we are going to start to confront that head on in this season.